Welcome back to another episode of The Football Chemist, where we use data to go through football's biggest talking points without boring or confusing you with all of that technical jargon. In this video, we will analyse the top of the table clash between Liverpool and Arsenal this Sunday, including Eberechi Eze's potential influence, Liverpool's threat on the break, and how the Gunners can capitalise on Alisson's weak start to the season. So where exactly is this match going to be won or lost? Let's get into it. So the first major question is, who will Arsenal start on the wing? Because Bukayo Saka's injury leaves them with just two natural right wingers who can start. The first one is Ethan Nwaneri, who deputised very well for him last season when Saka was injured longer term. And the second option is 15-year-old Max Dowman, who impressed on his debut when he came on off the bench against Leeds. However, Arteta has tended to use Nwaneri more centrally this season. And as for Dowman, it seems like quite a big step up for him to make his full Premier League debut against the reigning champions. Therefore, I think it is most likely that Arteta will start Noni Madueke on the right wing because he is naturally left-footed and can cut inside similar to how Saka does or how Nwaneri did last season and fit that style of play that Arteta likes. Because Madueke had a very strong match against Leeds last time out and he was one of their best players, if not their best player, for so many attacking stats. As you can see here, he was up there with his shot-creating actions, and he led the way with his progressive carries, passed into the penalty area and touched into the attacking third too. He's done more than enough to earn another start, and he might just have to start on the right-hand side this weekend, just to adapt to Saka's injury, really. But then who will be starting on the left? Again, there are three main choices. The first is Gabriel Martinelli, but he seems quite out of favour so far this season. He had a very underwhelming match against Manchester United on the opening day, and he was actually the starter who touched the ball the least in Arsenal's side. And then even against Leeds last weekend, he didn't even get a single minute. Players like Dowman and Nwaneri both came on off the bench before him, and this suggests that he is out of favour. So again, he is unlikely to start such a big match. Another option could be Leandro Trossard, who has got a very good historical record against Liverpool, but this is slightly flattered by one hat-trick that he got for Brighton. And since he's moved to Arsenal, the stats are less good. He's only got 1 goal and 1 assist in his 6 matches against Liverpool in a Gunners shirt. And the final option for Arteta is whether he wants to hand a debut to his newest signing, Eberechi Eze, who has already ended Liverpool's title dreams once back in 2024 when he scored the only goal in a 1-0 win back in April, which really stunted Liverpool's title bid. But when we compare Eze and Trossard head-to-head, we can see that whilst their raw stats are fairly even, especially their goal-scoring stats, Eze does seem to have a bit of a creative edge on Trossard, and we can see this most clearly with his key passes here, where there is quite a big difference between the two. And given Eze's star quality and the fact that he has already played this season just for Crystal Palace, and that he knows what he's doing in the Premier League, it's not that big a risk to hand a debut to him, because he will be able to have a big influence on the match. So if Eze does start on the left and Madueke starts on the right, how will Liverpool react? Because they've also got fullback dilemmas to try and combat this. I said in my last video, when I did the preview for Newcastle versus Liverpool, that Andy Robertson should start ahead of Milos Kerkez in the bigger match. And Kerkez's performance in that match has only gone to prove my point further. Kerkez really did get bullied physically against Newcastle and was very weak against crosses, and this is going to be exacerbated against Arsenal when you consider Gyökeres's aerial threat and even players like Jurriën Timber coming in at the far post from right back. Because when we look at some clips against Newcastle, we can see here one of the early chances that Newcastle had in that match. We can see Kerkez here marking Anthony Gordon man-to-man, doing a pretty good job. He's very well positioned. But when the cross from Barnes comes in, we can see that Gordon does manage to get ahead of Kerkez, manages to jump up. He's not even jumped that high up. He gets a good header onto it. Ultimately, he heads over, but there's a big warning sign for Kerkez. And then in the second half, he didn't get away with it. Because when we look at the first goal that Newcastle scored, we can see, again, Kerkez is in a good position. There's a big gap between him and Guimaraes. He's got plenty of time to react as he is marking him zonally here. But when push comes to shove, Guimaraes easily gets above Kerkez, who just tries to block him off rather than actually trying to win the header. And we can see that Guimaraes has actually won the header there without even needing to jump or get above his height. This is not a good picture for any defender to see. And this allowed Newcastle back into the game, and it very nearly cost Liverpool 2 points. But why would Robertson necessarily be a better option than Kerkez then? Quite simply, Robertson tends to be a lot less error prone than Kerkez. And we can see this here very clearly when you look at their two stats side by side since Kerkez came to the Premier League in 2023. He makes far more errors per 90 than Robertson, and Robertson also does have the edge in terms of aerials won. So when it comes to crosses, like he did against Newcastle, we could see Robertson holding up a bit better. He's got the experience, he knows how to play in Liverpool's system, and he's worked well with Van Dijk for so many years, whereas Kerkez is still settling in. And in such a big match, Liverpool needs stability. Because as I said in the video against Newcastle, Robertson is also slightly better in possession than Kerkez, because as we can see here, he prefers to keep the ball in the middle third a bit more rather than bombing forward like Kerkez does. And again, this is just a bit more stability against a higher level opposition that Liverpool will crave in such a big match. And Robertson versus Madueke should be a very compelling battle to watch on Sunday, because as we know, Madueke loves to carry the ball forward, loves to dribble into the penalty area, and the stats show that he is actually one of the best in the Premier League for this. Robertson, on the other hand, though, does very well against dribblers. He doesn't commit too many fouls, he doesn't lose too many aerial battles. The fact that these numbers are so high for a supposedly negative stat does not mean that he's bad at it. It means that he's actually one of the best at it. But also when you consider these other stats, which seem on the face of it mediocre, they're actually a lot better than they look, because Robertson is playing for a higher level team where he'll do a lot less defending than the average Premier League player. Therefore, his 54th percentile for dribblers tackle is actually a lot more impressive than it looks. And therefore, Robertson versus Madueke should be quite a good matchup, and it'll be a very good battle to see them going back and forth throughout the match, should both of them start. On the right-hand side, it's a bit more easy for Liverpool because Bradley is expected to start, having got some minutes under his belt against Newcastle. And what he'll expect against Eze is a very traditional attacker who gets goals and is more of a passer than a dribbler, and is generally just a very rounded attacker. Fortunately for Liverpool, Bradley is also a very rounded fullback. Not only is he a very good carrier of the ball going forward, his defensive stats are very good for a player who plays for a top team. Also, he makes very few errors. He didn't make a single error last season. And yes, it's a bit of a smaller sample size than some other players, but this is still a very impressive trait to have. And Bradley has shown maturity well beyond his years whenever he's put on a Liverpool shirt. But this season, it's not just been Arsenal's wingers who have been a big threat for them going forward, because their other threat has been their fullbacks. But against Liverpool, this could well be their weakness. Alright, yes, it's only been 2 matches, but so far, Arsenal's best attacking outlets have been their 2 fullbacks, Julian Timber and Ricardo Cagliafiori. And when we look at their stats this season compared to Arsenal's 2 main attackers, it's quite funny to see them actually leading Gyökeres and Saka in so many key attacking stats. I know what you're going to say is such a small sample size, it's only 2 matches, but this was a trend that we did actually see quite a bit last season, with their defenders and their fullbacks checking in with more goals and more assists than you would expect. Because when we look at their distribution of goals and assists over last season, what we can see here is the fullbacks got a fair few assists and the strikers got very few assists compared to other big teams. Even the wingers were having fairly average levels when you consider that in most teams, the wingers are the main creative outlets. So we know Arsenal's fullbacks love to get forward and love to create chances, whether it's from open play or corners. And they did this very well against Leeds, but there were some cracks in that match, which I want to analyse a bit deeper. Because when we look at the build-up play for Arsenal's second goal against Leeds, what we see here is just before Arsenal win the ball back, Leeds have just recovered the ball from Martin Zubimendi. And it looks like they're about to go on a quick counter-attack because they've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 players swarming forward, ready to counter-attack. Whereas with Arsenal, Timber here is one of their furthest forward players, and so he's never going to be able to get back in time to defend if Leeds are good on the counter-attack. Fortunately for Arsenal though, Rice won the ball back, played it out wide to Timber, and then Arsenal were 2-0 up. So they got away with it this time, but unfortunately for them, if they were to do this against Liverpool, you'd expect the Reds to be a lot better on the counter than Leeds were here. Because Liverpool have got the perfect midfielders to be able to turn the ball over and get on a quick counter-attack. When we looked at ball recoveries last season, Gravenberch was 8th in the Premier League for this. And he wasn't the only Liverpool player who is up there. McAllister was 40th and Szoboszlai was 57th. So all three are very strong at hoovering the ball up in midfield. And we saw this against Newcastle as well. Between the 2 midfielders, Jones and Gravenberch, and even Szoboszlai played a bit at right back, but also a bit in midfield. We can see that they were so good on the counter in that match because not only were they winning the ball back, with their ball recoveries and tackles won, but they're also very strong with their passing. Look at how many progressive passes and how many passes into the final third they did too. And when we look at these stats here, it does make quite a compelling case that Curtis-Jones could start against Arsenal ahead of Szoboszlai should McAllister still be out injured. But as of this point, we are still a bit unsure on whether McAllister will be fit enough to start this weekend. But whilst Liverpool might be strong at winning the ball back in midfield, they've got some defensive weaknesses too, not just at centre-back, but also in goal. So I covered Liverpool's defensive frailties in my last video, and it's still very much relevant as Konate had another poor game against Newcastle, and he'll be under a lot of pressure this weekend. But another thing I want to take a look at is Alisson's very underwhelming start to this season. Konate got a lot of stick for Willisula's equaliser in the match against Newcastle, but the other thing that should be noted is Alisson really should have saved that shot and let the ball go through his legs, and was very non-committal when he came out to try and stop the shot. And whilst this is only one example, and we need to take stats from the start of this season with a pinch of salt because it's such a small sample size, Alisson's starting numbers are not great so far this season. Because Liverpool have conceded the fourth most goals so far this season, and when we look at Alisson specifically, he's got one of the lowest save percentages in the league. And when we look at his post-shot expected goals minus goals allowed, which is basically a goalkeeper's equivalent to goals minus XG, we can see he's in the negative so far, minus 1.3, which is 18th in the league. These are hardly the stats of a top keeper, and yes, it's only been 2 matches, but when we look at Alisson's stats over his Liverpool career, there is enough to suggest that there might be a slight decline in his performance over the last few years. Because again, when we take the post-shot XG minus goals allowed since Alisson moved to Liverpool, we can see a very steady decline over the last few seasons before a big drop-off so far this season. But even over the last 3 seasons, he is negative in 23 to 24, which implies that he's been a worse goalkeeper than the average goalkeeper. And even 24-25, he was only lightly positive. And this decline is backed up when we look at his save percentage during his Liverpool career. It started off very high. His first season was his best in a Liverpool shirt. And whilst he had a bit of a dip in 19-20, you can see his last 3 seasons have actually been 3 of his 4 worst in his Liverpool career. We can definitely see a bit of a downward trend here. And this isn't even taken into account this season so far, where his save percentage is 33.3, way lower than any of these numbers. Yes, that'll improve as the season goes on, but it's still very concerning. But it's one thing having a weak goalkeeper or a goalkeeper who's out of form, but do Arsenal have the attackers to make the most of this? Because when we look at their goals minus their XG, basically the opposite of what we've been looking at with Alisson, we can see it's a bit of a mixed bag. Here are their stats from last season, and 3 of them are in different colours because they weren't playing for Arsenal last season. But we can see Gyökeres was very good. Ranieri was actually very impressive last season. But Arsenal have also got 3 attackers in the negative. And these are also 3 attackers that I've highlighted as potential starters this weekend. And so if they were all to start, goals could be an issue. Because yes, Gyökeres is very high on this graph, but this was in a different league for a different team. And he's not looked as clinical in the Premier League in the 2 matches so far this season. So with all of that considered, what do we think will happen this Sunday? So far this season, both teams have entertained. Liverpool's matches this season have seen 11 goals, whereas Arsenal managed to put 5 past leads. And this should suggest a goal fest, but I think in reality, the match will be a lot more underwhelming than this, because we saw how much Arsenal struggled to create chances in their last away match against Manchester United. And this suggests their win against Leeds was more of Leeds being weak than Arsenal being particularly strong. Liverpool's attack has been brilliant this season. They scored 7 goals, but they're coming up against the best defence in the league. I think they will be largely nullified by Gabriel and Saliba. When we look at their head-to-head in the last 5 meetings, 4 of them have actually been draws, and 3 of them have actually been a 2-2 scoreline. And so a draw is definitely the safe bet to make here. Interestingly though, Liverpool haven't won at Anfield against Arsenal since 2021 and haven't won any of their last 6 league meetings. And this is basically their head-to-head since Arsenal started challenging for the title over the last 3 seasons. However, with all things considered, I'm going to pull the old Mark Lawrenson trick and take a look at a big match and go for a 1-1 prediction straight down the line. I think it will not be a particularly interesting match. It will be cagey. It's a huge match, even if it is the 3rd match of the season. But I think both sides will manage to get a goal and the points will be shared. and I think this is a pretty good result for both teams given their current situations. But what do you think? How will this match pan out, and where can you see Liverpool and Arsenal trying to get the advantage over one another? Let me know what you think in the comments below, and give this video a like if you liked what you've seen. Also, feel free to subscribe to this channel if you want to see more content like this, and for some more short form and behind the scenes content, give us a follow on Instagram and TikTok for more. I'll see you next time.